Hello, and welcome back to the Steel Woman podcast. I am your host, Osley, and today we are continuing on with my deconstruction story. Before I get into the dirty details, they're not dirty, but whatever, I just want to say, if you have a problem with the audio quality, you don't like this mic, I would appreciate it if you let me know, because although I do not have a problem with it, I don't know if it's an issue for other people. It's not the best audio quality ever, and I do have a Blue Yeti I could be using. I just like holding the microphone. So yeah, I just want to say, if the audio is bothering you, please let me know. Now let's get into it. I think I want to share where I am currently, just for the sake of being transparent. I do tend to try to avoid using labels to identify myself, just because I really don't like when people make assumptions about me just because of something that I use to define myself with. I'm a feminist, for example. And I feel like as soon as you say I'm a feminist, there's just all of these assumptions that are immediately just flung at you. And so I like to avoid that as much as possible by explaining my positions and then attaching the label at the end. But I think it would be nice to just go ahead and be fully transparent. For the sake of that, for the sake of being concise, I'm an agnostic atheist currently. I heard Bart Ehrman define agnostic atheist, and it just made a whole lot of sense to me. It resonated. I was like, that's exactly where I am, and that's what I would consider myself at this point in time. I'm not married to that title. I'm not married to that label, but that is where I am currently. So let me just explain what that means. Agnosticism is about what you do or do not know. Theism or atheism is about what you do or do not believe. So if someone were to ask me, do you know if there is a God? I would say, no, I don't know. And how could I know? There's really no way to demonstrate that currently, right? I don't know. And if someone asked, do you believe in God? I would say, I don't believe that there is one because I don't see the evidence for it. For me, in this definition, agnostic atheist, I might be describing what some Christians would assume is just agnosticism, because I'm not making a positive statement. I'm not saying there is no God. I know there is no God. There couldn't be a God. That's impossible, and I can prove it. I'm not making a positive assertion. I'm saying I don't believe there is because I'm unconvinced based on the evidence that I have heard. I don't think there is good evidence for God. So now that that's out of the way, I want to continue on with my story of deconstruction. I finished off the last episode talking about the decision that my husband and I made to switch churches a little over a year ago. We switched churches. We loved this new church. I was trying to, in a way, turn my life around and rededicate myself to God and just get in a better place, because I hadn't felt like I was in a good place spiritually. I started reading this really good book called Boundaries. It was a Christian book all about like how to set really healthy boundaries with people. And I had a Christian therapist. I was feeling really good. And we were going to this church, and we were in this sweet season of life for about 6 months, I would say. And then I saw a TikTok. TikTok. Oh, that's a whole nother story. But this TikTok was a meme, and it wasn't just the TikTok itself. It was the comments that really started getting the wheels turning in a way they had never turned before. So Jesus is knocking on the door, and there's text bubbles coming out of his mouth saying, "Open the door so I can save you." And there's text bubbles then coming out of the window saying, "Save me from what?" And then Jesus responds, "Save you from what I'm going to do to you if you don't let me save you." And it just was like, my instinct, my reaction was like, well, that's stupid. Jesus doesn't save me from what he would do to me if I wouldn't let him save me. And then I was like, well, is there truth in that? Is God sending me to hell if I don't accept his offer of love? If God isn't sending me to hell, is Satan sending me to hell? Is God not stronger than Satan? Is God not in charge of who goes to hell? Did God not create hell? It's just like a few questions just started bubbling up. Like, wait, is there truth to this? And I started reading the comments. And I think there's one comment from the Christian saying, like, this is stupid. Like, God doesn't send you to hell. Like, your own sin sends you to hell. Your unrepentance sends you to hell. And the comment underneath that comment, which I'm assuming was from a non-believer, said, I think the point of this video is, why would God set up a system that he knew would fail? I don't know if that was the point of the meme or not, but the comment stirred up some more questions in my mind. Like, yeah, didn't God set all of this up to begin with? Doesn't God hold some responsibility here if he's all powerful? I don't know why. Looking back now, like, it's been almost a year now since I saw that TikTok. It'll be like a year and 2 months. I don't know why that one in particular stuck out to me. I really don't. Like, you guys, I've gone to college. I was taught critical thinking in college. I have heard people criticize Christianity before. I had heard people talk about, like, oh, the Gospels aren't even written by eyewitnesses. I had dismissed that. I'd heard stuff before. I don't know why this TikTok was the one that really started it all for me. It's very anticlimactic to say so, but it has stuck in my mind like nothing else. That was the beginning for me in starting to question God. I've started viewing God in a completely different way, and it was really scary at first. So yeah, this started a lot of questions. It was on my mind a lot, and I started seriously questioning whether or not God was justified in sending people to hell when he was the one who set up the system in the first place, and he is all powerful, and he is all knowing, and he's also supposed to be perfectly loving and merciful. I confessed to my husband probably a few weeks after seeing this TikTok. We were on a walk, and I just started asking him some of my questions. It's like, have you ever thought about this? Have you ever thought about this? Well, what about this? I just, started asking him if he had had some of the same concerns as I was having. And I think it really surprised him that I was having these doubts. And I was getting kind of emotional and upset, not at him, but at God. And I think that was really troubling to him. And it was scary to me, too, to say these things out loud, because it's one thing to think it in your mind, but speaking it out loud to another person makes it feel more real. Like, oh, I don't have answers to these things, and these things aren't sitting right with me, and I don't know if I can worship this God. Ooh, this is serious. I'm in some serious doo-doo. And The conversation didn't go badly, but I think it definitely was alarming for both me and my husband. It's really, I'm just going to pause here and say it's really odd to think that this was only a year ago. And it's hard for me to jump back into my emotional state at the time because I have progressed so far past that moment. It's almost difficult for me to understand why it was such an emotional, scary thing for me to admit out loud that I didn't know if God was good or not. Like, my fear of hell and my level of indoctrination was so severe that I was scared to think anything that might be blasphemous or offensive to God. I'm just remembering now, actually, as I'm talking about it, I remember so many times in that conversation while we were on the walk, I would stop and say, like, Lord, I'm not trying to be blasphemous here. Like, Lord, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I kept on putting in these little disclaimers because, I don't know, was I afraid that a tree was going to fall on me or like God was going to strike me with lightning? Kind of. It was sort of that superstitious attitude. And so every time that I would say things like, why did God punish Adam and Eve for being deceived when being deceived wasn't even their fault? It was God's fault for putting Satan in the garden. Like, if I was going to say something like that in that conversation, I would preface it with, God, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. So, God, it was so emotional. It was, but I'm so glad that I did it. I'm so glad that I had that conversation because if I had just kept it bottled up, I really don't know what would have happened. So after that conversation, I kept on getting content on TikTok that was deconstruction content. I kept on asking myself more questions, but a lot of it was just in my head. And I remember there was this one creator, that atheist girl on TikTok, her name's Christy. Her videos would come up on my For You page all the time, and I wouldn't even allow myself to like the video. Definitely not comment, but I wouldn't allow myself to like the video even if I watched it all the way through and even if I liked it, because I felt like if I supported that content, it was a point for Satan and a point against me and a point against God, and that I was somehow being blasphemous. So very much so still in a state of superstition and fear, afraid to even think. Then I did something that at the time I knew was naughty. I don't think it actually was, but at the time I was like, this is dangerous. What am I doing? I went and I searched up Christian deconverted to atheism testimonies. I wanted to hear from atheists who used to be Christians. I wanted to hear, why did you deconvert? Because what I realized is that I didn't have much experience with atheists, and I was just curious on their perspective. I wanted to hear. I listened to a few. I couldn't even tell you who these people are. I don't remember their names. They're just random people. There's a lot of them on YouTube, but they were so eye-opening, and I felt so validated listening to them because so many of the things that they said in their deconversion or deconstruction stories, the things that ultimately made them walk away from Christianity, so many of their questions and concerns were the ones that I was having. And I felt like I had never heard a Christian talk about these things. And so hearing them from atheists, it was really scary because at the time I was still identifying as a Christian. And it was scary because I felt like it was this sign that maybe I was going to be an atheist one day. And at the time, that was like my worst nightmare. I didn't want to lose my faith. I didn't want to lose my religion because I didn't want to go to hell. But it was so important for me to listen to those videos because for the first time in my life, I listened to these atheists and I just didn't see evil in them. And I know it might sound strange to some people, and it even sounds strange to me saying it now, but when I was a Christian, there was something about atheists that I just thought that they had Satan's evil spirit in them, that they were guided by Satan, that they were in cahoots with Satan, they were deceived by Satan. It was this weird way of dehumanizing them, which I know now, but listening to their testimonies listening to their deconversion testimonies and their rational approach to deconstructing the Bible, their critical thinking, their love for other people. Like many of these atheists walked away because they felt like they couldn't truly love people in Christianity. It opened my eyes to the fact that like these are good people, and I've been wrong to think that atheists are these evil, amoral Satan pawns. I didn't want to lose my faith though. I wanted to keep working at this, and I thought that I just needed to get better answers. I needed to pray more. I needed to plug into church more. I just needed to work harder. The reason that I didn't reach out to my family or a spiritual religious leader at that time, even though I know that I could have, was twofold. Number one, I was working on building my confidence. This is something I've been working on in therapy. I had gotten to the realization that I struggle with feeling confident in my ability to figure things out on my own and to just be my own person without need of validation from family and friends. To stand on my own 2 feet and to be sure about who I am and what I stand for. So I've been working on increasing my confidence. And I felt like if I was just gonna go back to the way I used to be, which the way I used to be is if I had a question about the Bible or I had a moral dilemma or anything, I would contact a family member and just to get their opinion so that I didn't have to think about it. And so I could just do the right thing by their standards and just feel good about myself and feel good about the situation. I don't think it's wrong to get advice. I don't think it's wrong to get counsel. Literally, I'm still in therapy, all right? I'm paying for professional counsel and advice. I think when it's a problem, and when it was a problem for me, is when I put certain people on pedestals and I thought that they have it all figured out and I just need to mimic them. Not only do I need to just mimic them, I need to make sure that they approve of me. It was a weird form of people pleasing. I do tend to be a rebel, but at the same time, I want to feel validated. And it's this weird thing about me that I don't fully understand, but it had gotten to be a problem where I really used certain people in my life to figure out what I thought about everything. And I was using those people and their opinions that they had formed through research and whatever to avoid having to do all of that hard stuff myself. I just wanted to feel good about my beliefs. Like, oh, a smart person believes this, so I believe this. A really moral, good person does this, okay, so I'm going to do this. And I just didn't do much critical thinking when it came to my own beliefs, my own morals. I didn't do much of that. I was kind of just a sheep in a lot of ways. So yeah, Because I was working on that in therapy, I saw this as an opportunity to work through these things on my own and build my confidence. I didn't want to destroy all the progress that I was making. A second reason is that I thought my relationship with God is between me and Him, and it doesn't matter what other people say. It doesn't matter what other people believe. At the end of the day, when I die and stand before the judgment throne, it's going to be about whether or not I had a relationship with God. So this is a personal journey that I need to take. It's about what makes me feel comfortable, what gives me peace, what God has to say to me. It really has nothing to do with my family members and their theology. So for those two reasons, I decided I want to do this on my own, and I want to see if I can figure it out on my own. Maybe I'll go and ask advice in, a few weeks or a few months, but let me just give myself a little bit of time to see if I can't work through these things on my own, me and God. I kept on having conversations with my husband about my questions, but I found that it was sort of creating a little bit of tension. Maybe tension's the wrong word, more of a burden. I felt like I was burdening him with all of these questions, that I was putting questions in his mind, planting seeds of doubt in his mind. And once I realized I was doing that, I got really scared. Because even though I was questioning, I didn't want to weaken my spouse's faith. So I decided that I needed to bring this up in therapy with my Christian therapist. Until this time, I hadn't talked about my faith crisis with her. So I brought it up to her in therapy, and I remember sobbing. I could barely get it out. It felt like this huge confession. So scary to say it out loud to yet another person, because it just felt like this next level of confirmation to myself that I really was having big questions, not just little doubts, big doubts. She was so supportive and comforting, didn't shame me at all, and it was such a beautiful, healing therapy session in a lot of ways. And it was just another hurdle that I had to overcome in order to accept that that is truly where I was. That's just the fact of the matter. I was doubting. So it helped me accept myself a little bit more. And she also encouraged me to write down questions. She said, if you have a bunch of questions, why don't you write them down and we'll talk about them in session. The moment that session ended, I ran to my notebook, and one of my many notebooks, and I started writing down my questions. I probably wrote down 20 or 30 within, 20 or 30 minutes, just writing down everything, and it felt so good to get it on paper. And I also decided, okay, it's game on. I need to start reading the Bible from the beginning today. So I picked out my chronological Bible and I started reading from the beginning. And every time that I had a question, I would write it down in my notebook. I have that notebook here with me, and I want to together go through some of those questions that I had at the time. I think you will probably notice a theme in the questions. I definitely did as I was writing them down. But here are a few of the questions that I was having. Why did God allow Satan to corrupt Adam and Eve, especially if he knew that the result would be millions and millions of people suffering on earth and then in hell for all eternity? Lot and his family were supposed to be the only righteous people left in the city, but Lot offered his daughters over to all the men of Sodom and Gomorrah to be raped. He literally was like, do whatever to them, just not my guests who are grown-ass men and could have a better chance than my daughters. Like, at least sacrifice yourself, not somebody else. Also, Lot's daughters later got their dad drunk and they both raped him so they could perpetuate their lovely family line. These people are considered righteous. And yet today, a perfectly kind, good citizen who is also an atheist could be sent to hell for not rape or incest or betrayal, but just for being a good citizen who happens to not believe in God. Is that fair? How can a perfect, holy, powerful, all-knowing God have a regret? How could he make a mistake that ended with so many souls perishing? Like, that is a big mistake on human terms. To lose that many lives when you were all-powerful and you saw it coming, why let that happen? How? That question was regarding the flood. Did everyone who wasn't God's chosen people just die and go to hell in the Old Testament? Like, was this kind of... this was before the gospel and missionaries, so were whole societies just damned? If God planted morality in the hearts of man because we're made in his image and his word is planted in our hearts, then at what point did we start being morally accountable for sins like incest, polygamy, and rape? If we're born with a moral compass and conscience, when did we start being born with the knowledge that that stuff was wrong? After the 10 Commandments? Did God change mankind's collective conscience at that time? Or is sexuality and sexual stuff not so important, morally speaking? Is it just murder, stealing, and lying that's bad? So this is referring to the likelihood, if you believe in the literal Adam and Eve story, that their children would have had to mate in order for humankind to be a thing. At that time, as a Christian, I thought that God's law, God's moral code was written on everybody's heart. And so that really confused me. It's like, at what point was that written on our hearts? You know what I'm saying? Because it seems like morality has changed a lot. And this is before, I read about slavery in the Bible too. So I was just, did God give us free will, or did he predetermine everything? It says something about vessels of destruction. So does that mean that God created some people to use their evil ways to his advantage and then just dispose of them? It also says God hardens hearts. So it seems kind of like we don't have free will. But Adam and Eve had to have some free will, right? A perfect holy God can't make people disobey him, right? That was their choice. Assuming we have free will to follow Jesus or not, is it actually even possible to define it as free will? For example, we're given a choice: follow Christ, love him, devote your life's purpose to glorifying him, or burn in hell for all eternity. Is that a choice or an ultimatum? If I told my kid they could love me or I'll let very bad people come take them away and torture them, that would feel like a threat. Any love that my kid showed me then would feel like it was coming from a place of fear, at least a little bit. And perfect love is supposed to cast out all fear, right? Is God's relationship with mankind toxic? Apparently, we're given free will to follow Christ, or perish by our own sins and our own folly. But my lack of choices started from the very beginning of my existence. I didn't choose to exist. No one does. So I came into this world non-consensually, and now I'm just given 2 choices: worship the right God, hopefully you're lucky enough to discover who he is and live in a place that teaches the gospel, or burn in hell forever. Wow, that sucks. Honestly, I might have opted for never even existing at all. But of course, I didn't have that choice. Is everyone on earth really given a choice to follow Jesus? So many people are from different cultures and backgrounds, and they follow their religion just as best as they can. Are they exempt from hellfire? At what age are we morally accountable to God? When do we leave our childish innocence behind and become sinful, immoral monsters of the flesh, deserving eternal damnation? Or are even the little children deserving of hellfire and torment? The more I have started to look at myself with love, compassion, and even some sympathy, the more at peace I feel and the more kindness I can then extend to others. But aren't I supposed to see myself as God sees me without Christ? Entirely depraved, wicked, and unworthy of love? Without Christ, how are any of us worthy of love? I mean, the Bible says we're not, right? I feel like the Bible's message of sin promotes a hefty bit of self-hate. Hefty. Does God really love me and think that I'm precious and dear, or does he only see himself? Because he died and covers my sins, God sees Christ instead of my sins. And apparently I'm wicked and depraved to my core, so can God really actually love me, or just Christ himself? If God does love me, what does he love about me? Why does he love me? What about me is good and worthy of love in his eyes? Is it my love for him? The fact I accept his offer? My sense of humor? What? Is someone's personal experience with God or a feeling of peace better than someone else's? I've heard former Christians say they felt peace after deconstructing and converting to atheism. I've heard former atheists talk about the peace they felt when they came to Christ. Whose subjective experience is a better indicator or measure of truth? This one's funny. Why does the Bible focus so much on men? The bloodline, heritage, genealogy, characters? Most of that is about men from the beginning. Why? Is it because men are more important to talk about? If God created the concept of free will and gave it to us, doesn't that mean that there are probably some limitations? For example, let's say that I create some beings. I give them the ability to make their own choices, but I limit their ability to know what their choices are. I don't reveal myself to them. I set it up so they have to find me. Some won't. And I've set it up like that. If they don't find me, damnation. Am I still perfect? Is that not a little bit weird? If Adam and Eve are responsible 100% for the fall and their sin, how is God all powerful? If God can take 0% responsibility for our choice to sin as mankind, then us sinning is out of his control, meaning his power has limits. Or then why did he set up a system he knew would fail? Can true love exist when the person demanding love has the power to damn you for eternity should you choose not to love them? I think it's important to mention that I was asking all these questions when I was still a Christian, and I really didn't want to lose my faith. I, at this point in time, was kind of angry at God. I felt like he just hadn't given us enough information, and it made me really angry at him, because if he is truly all powerful, he should have the ability to give us those answers. And it felt like crumbs at that point. I felt like, why have you made this so confusing? Why? There just were so many questions. And I was angry, and I was really, really scared. I was still going to church at this time and seeking God. I even felt like God was speaking to me through the sermons, and I was going to get answers. I had to believe that I was going to get answers. I just needed to work harder at this than I'd ever worked at it before. So yeah, I picked up the chronological Bible. I started reading from the beginning. While I was reading the Bible and writing down all my questions, I started doing some theorizing. Is that a word? Theorizing? Hypothesizing on my own. I felt like it was my responsibility to make this stuff make sense. And I felt like it was going to go one of two ways. Either God was going to give me some sort of divine revelation in the middle of the night, and all my questions would be answered, and I'd have the key to knowledge. That's what I was really hoping for. Or I would have this personal experience with God that was so undeniable, it would just blow my mind that I wouldn't even care to ask the questions anymore. Or that I needed to learn Greek and start studying the Bible and figure out the mysteries of it and better understand it. Or come up with theories to make it make sense. And I really don't know why I thought it was a good idea to start coming up with theories about how I could reconcile all of these contradictions, but at the time it felt right. It felt like a necessity. And I felt like I had permission to do that? Like, why can't I just make up stuff? I know all this stuff is true. I just can't understand it right now. So I just need to come up with some elaborate story to make it all make sense. So I'll share with you my favorite theory that I came up with, just for funsies, and then we'll probably have to end this episode. There's a scene in Avengers Endgame where Doctor Strange is meditating, doing his little to see how they could beat Thanos. And I can't remember how many million, trillion different scenarios he meditated through. There was only one way to beat Thanos out of all those different ways. And so one day, I just thought of that scene, and I was like, that must have been what God did. God is all-knowing, right? And he's also all-powerful, but there are certain things that are just kind of out of his control. He can't violate because he makes laws, and then he's bound by those laws because, well, he just is. And it makes sense because God was enemies with Satan. God was enemies with evil, and he knew that he needed to defeat Satan and evil. So way back when, before he made Earth, he did that little meditation type thing, like Doctor Strange did, to figure out what would be the way to beat Satan and evil for good. And he saw that the only way, the one way, was to do it in a way where Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins. And everything that happened in the Old Testament, the flood, the genocide, the fall, all of that, that was necessary. All those things had to happen in order for Jesus to come and for sin and evil to be defeated finally. This theory assumed that God's hands were tied, at least in some ways. It did impose a limitation to his power. He wasn't all powerful. He saw that there was a way, and he picked that one way because he had to. I don't know. It obviously does not make sense for a variety of reasons. Even if it did make sense, there's absolutely no evidence, not even in the Bible, that that is what actually happened. But I was so desperate to make it make sense that I, for probably a few days, thought that that was a really good theory, and that's enough to me to make me trust God again. That was enough for a few days. And then I was reading the Bible every single day. The more that I read it, and the more questions I wrote down, the more that I was learning about God's nature from the Bible, that theory just dissolved. I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing making up this story that is, it just came from your head? It's not in the Bible. What are you doing? Either you're going to read the Bible for what it is, or you're going to just go off on this loony path of making shit up just because you feel like you can. So I had to kind of reel myself back in and go, no, you have to read the Bible for what it is. And there's just no evidence of your Doctor Strange theory. I brought up some of my questions to my therapist. I told her that I was reading the chronological Bible and that I really didn't want any sort of theological commentary interfering with my relationship with God. I was like, I just want it to be between me and God. And I've always heard that if you picked up a Bible on a deserted island, the Holy Spirit could come in and do its thing and change your life and save you. And I really want to test that theory and see if God can speak to me through his word without me having to go find some theologian that's well known and just go off of his interpretation of the Bible. So thankfully, even at that time, I did have an awareness of like, all of the denominations, all of the theologians, all of the pastors around me have their own interpretations of the Bible. I felt like that's fine. I just need to find what mine is. And that'll be my sort of personal relationship with God. As long as I feel peace with it, that'll be okay. After a few weeks of just reading the Bible and writing down my questions, I was feeling pretty lost and demoralized. I was praying too. I feel like that's important to mention because I feel like Christians always love to say like, well, it doesn't sound like you were praying. I was. I was praying, and I remember I told my therapist, like, I feel nothing. I ask for him to show himself, and I feel like it's embarrassingly silent. It's weird. And I'm scared that I'm just gonna answer my own prayer, and how will I know if it's me or God? How would I even test that? It was a really like radio silence. But I was still praying, because at this time I was really hopeful that God would answer me somehow. So after a few weeks of that, after feeling really demoralized and depressed and discouraged, I said, I need to be listening to some commentary. I need that. But I don't want to just go listen to Christians, and because I've done that my whole life. I've only ever listened to Christians, and I still remembered how those atheist deconversion testimonies, they were making a lot of sense. And so I was like, I think I feel comfortable listening to debates between Christians and atheists. That's where I want to move from here, because I want to be really balanced in my approach. I don't want to just keep tickling my ears with what I want to hear. I truly need good answers. So let me listen to debates. I can't remember the first debate I listened to. I really wish that I could. But I do remember, maybe it was Sam Harris and William Lane Craig. That might have been one of the first ones that I listened to. And I remember just being really disappointed. And I was truly disappointed by the answers that the Christians were giving. I just remember thinking to myself, this is pathetic. Like, this is not good. And it felt like the Christians were making excuses for the horrendous things in the Old Testament, like slavery, like genocide, like RAPE, like the crazy laws. I was just reading things in the Old Testament and disgusted. I remember I had to stop reading the Bible in the beginning of the day because it would just ruin my whole day. I remember my husband, there was one time in particular, he walked by where I was reading the Bible. I think I was making some face. And I think he just says, I'm like, oh no, like, you're reading it. And like, it just started to turn into this really negative thing. Every time I read the Bible, it just like really ruined my day. And I was like, I feel like it should be having the opposite effect. So hearing Christians almost defending the immoral, the obviously harmful, immoral rhetoric in the Old Testament was really, really disappointing. And I was finding myself agreeing with the atheists more times than not. I then discovered Bart Ehrman. And one debate that he had, I remember toward the end of the debate, he said something, and it was kind of a breaking point for me. And not a breaking point, but a turning point where I really started to commit myself to seeking for truth. I don't want to butcher what he said, but I'm paraphrasing here, but he gave a word of encouragement to people who are questioning. He said, if anyone is questioning, I commend you. I commend you for thinking critically through these things. It is a scary thing to do. It is not easy to put your entire belief system under a microscope and start analyzing it. And it was the first time that I had heard anybody, it felt like permission. It felt like this permission to ask questions. It felt like this, I am proud of you. This affirmation, this confirmation, this validation that like I need, and I think we as humans, we do need that on some level. It gave me permission to commit myself to this process, to keep searching for truth boldly. That was what I needed to feel like, okay, I can keep going. I need to keep going. I shouldn't be afraid of the truth. Something else he said was, you shouldn't be afraid of the truth. And I think a light bulb went off in my head a little bit with that. I was like, okay, yeah, if God is real, then I'm going to find him through pursuing truth. I shouldn't be afraid of that. I shouldn't be afraid of knowledge. I shouldn't be afraid of critical thinking. I shouldn't be afraid of asking questions. I'm going to do this. And so I kept going. I do want to end it there just because there's so much to say, and I feel like I'm leaving stuff out. Like, it's kind of stressing me out because I feel like I'm leaving things out without remembering them. I have notes here, but they're not the best, to be completely honest. So in this episode, I talked about what started my deconstruction and the beginning, the first 2 to 3 months of my deconstruction. And yeah, I think this is a good place to stop. This has felt good, but I am trying to not forget everything and it's stressing me out. All right, I am done. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. I will be continuing on talking about my deconstruction and hopefully getting into a little bit more of the inner debates that I was having with myself and the breakthroughs that I had in leaving behind circular logic and those things.